I'm Martha Donovan, 68 years old, and last summer, as I was folding my blue swimsuit for our annual Lake Tahoe trip, I found a small tear along the hem. It was the same suit I'd worn every year since Howard passed, the one we'd picked out together, the summer before he got sick. I was sitting on the edge of the bed when the clock chimed 4, reminding me the kids would be arriving soon. The casserole was already in the oven. The blueberry pie was cooling on the counter, and the table was set for 4. What I didn't know was that before the sun went down, my children would let me know I was no longer part of the family vacation before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt the quiet sting of being left out by the people you love most. I've lived in the same house in Northern California for more than 40 years now. It's just me. But there was a time when it was full of noise and warmth. Howard and I bought it when Fletcher was 5 and Brooke was 3, back when interest rates were high, and we packed school lunches with coupons and prayed the car would make it another year. We had dreams like everyone but ours were simple. Raise good kids, keep the mortgage paid, and be decent people. Howard was steady like that. Worked at the paper mill all his life. He liked routines, yard work on Saturdays, family dinners on Sundays, blueberry pie every June when the bushes out back came in. I taught school part-time and took on full-time motherhood. The rest of the time, we didn't take vacations often, but once the kids were grown, we started going to Lake Tahoe every summer, a little cabin by the water. Nothing fancy, but it became tradition. Even after Howard passed, we kept going. Me, Brooke, Fletcher, their spouses, and the grandkids. I was thinking about all that. When the front door opened, Fletcher was first through, as usual. Tall like his father with thinning hair, and a habit of checking his phone, even as he gave me a kiss on the cheek. Veronica trailed behind sunglasses still on, nodding a quick hello before settling into the armchair and scrolling. Without a word, I asked where the kids were. She didn't look up. Babysitter, soccer birthday party, whatever it was, it meant I wouldn't see Aiden or Emma that day. Brooke and Nate came next. Brooke used to light up a room. Now she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hug was rushed, and when I glanced behind her for Lily and Lucas, she shook her head and said they were with Nate's mother. I nodded and didn't say anything. It wasn't the first time I'd been passed over for babysitting. The casserole was hot, and the table was ready. But Veronica wrinkled her nose and asked for just lettuce. No dressing. Fletcher dug in, then wiped his mouth and said they wanted to talk about the Tahoe trip. I smiled. I was just packing, I said, folding that same old swimsuit. He hesitated. Brooke looked down. Then she said, they'd rented a different cabin this year. Fewer rooms, Charles from work, and his kids were joining, and there wasn't space for me. I sat still for a moment, fork halfway to my mouth. I asked if they were serious. Fletcher said something about how last year I'd mentioned headaches. Brooke said, travel was hard at my age. It wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it, like they were doing me a kindness, sparing me from the noise, the hassle, the children. I nodded and said, I understood. I took a sip of water to steady my voice. I told them to have fun, that I'd find something else to do, but inside, it was like something folded in on itself. After dinner, they left quickly. No one wanted pie. They had early mornings ahead, they said. And as their cars pulled out of the driveway, I stood at the window, staring at the quiet street and the garden Howard had once planted with roses. I returned to the kitchen and started clearing the table, and that's when I saw it, a stack of papers left near the edge, probably forgotten by Fletcher as always, and right there on top was address my address, and the word sale in bold. Next to it were signatures and a draft agreement, a pending sale contract with a young family, the Porters, a mortgage approved through the bank, a final sale price that matched the market down to the penny. The house I had signed over to the kids 5 years ago was being sold, and no one had told me they hadn't just left me out of the trip. They had planned to send me away and sell the home Howard and I had built a life in. They were going to do it while I was at the lake. Probably leave a message. Ask me to be understanding. Call it necessary. Call it love. I sat there for a long time in the quiet, wrapping untouched pie in foil. Staring at those papers, I had been a mother, a wife, a teacher, a woman who'd spent her life giving. And now it seemed I had been reduced to a signature, a formality. The house was quiet again. I'd wrapped the leftover casserole, tucked the untouched pie into the fridge, and wiped down the counter twice, though it didn't need it. That's when I finally let myself sit down at the kitchen table and open the envelope I'd found. Fletcher must have forgotten it on his way out. There were half a dozen papers inside, all neatly stacked. I thought it might be something harmless, his insurance paperwork or a project from work. But the moment I saw my name and address at the top of the first page, my heart started beating harder. It was a preliminary sales agreement. My house. A pending transaction with a young couple, the Porters, along with mortgage approval papers, a scheduled closing date, and a draft version of a seller disclosure form. The signatures were already halfway there. All that remained was mine. I leaned back in the chair, holding the papers in both hands, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. They were selling the house, my home of 42 years. The place where Fletcher lost his first tooth, where Brooke learned to ride a bike in the driveway. The place Howard and I poured every spare penny into while raising our kids. I had signed it over to them 5 years ago after Howard passed. At the time, it made sense, simpler for taxes, easier down the road. They'd inherit it eventually. I kept the right to live in it for the rest of my life. That's what we agreed. But now they were moving forward with a sale without telling me. And the Tahoe trip I'd just been excluded from? That wasn't about noise or age or convenience. It was a distraction. A way to get me out of the house long enough to clean it out, close the sale, and come back to an arrangement I hadn't agreed to. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The only sound was the wall clock ticking across the room. At some point, I picked up the papers again and read them word for word. Not out of hope, out of disbelief. Every detail was planned. They'd even listed a target move-out date. The buyer's loan was pre-approved. The asking price was competitive, and there was no mention of me. At some point, the clock struck midnight. I stood up, folded the papers carefully, and placed them on the nightstand in my bedroom. I didn't turn on the light, just sat on the edge of the bed and stared into the dark. I knew my children, or at least, I thought I did. But I didn't recognize this version of them, the kind who'd make plans like this and never say a word. Who'd sell my home out from under me while I baked their favorite pie. By morning, the sky outside was a dull gray. I sat up, slowly pulled on my slippers, and reached for the papers again. They were still there, just as I'd left them. That's when I remembered Sheldon Hayes. He'd been our family attorney since the beginning. Howard trusted him. I did too. He was the one who helped us with the original transfer, and if anyone could help me understand what my rights were now, it was him. I made a pot of oatmeal and called Sheldon's office. A young voice answered, cheerful and brisk. She asked for my name, checked the calendar, then told me Sheldon could see me at 2 that afternoon. I hung up and breathed a little easier. The rest of the morning, I pulled together every document I thought might be relevant. Howard's will, the original deed, a copy of the life estate agreement. I knew Sheldon would want to see it all. I didn't have a printer, so I went to the secretary desk in the living room where I still kept paper copies in neat folders. Howard had set that system up back when everything still came in the mail. I never changed it. I wore my navy dress with the little floral print, the one I always saved for appointments or Sunday services. A touch of mascara. Perfume, not too much. I wanted to walk into that office with dignity, not as someone broken or desperate, but as someone ready to take action. Sheldon's office was downtown in the same old brick building with white columns and a creaky front door. The inside hadn't changed much in decades. Same polished floors, same smell of old paper and lemon cleaner. The receptionist walked me in, and Sheldon stood when I entered. "Martha," he said, shaking my hand. "It's been too long." He looked older than the last time I saw him, more silver in his hair, more weight behind his glasses. But his handshake was firm, and his eyes still sharp. I sat down across from him and opened my bag. "I'm sorry to drop this on you," I said, "but I need your help." I handed over the sale documents first. He read in silence, flipping pages slowly. When he finished, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "They didn't talk to you about this at all, no? I found the paperwork last night. They were going to tell me after the trip, I suppose. Or not at all." He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and nodded slowly. "They can legally sell it, technically. They're the title holders now. But they can't force you to leave. You have a life estate in the property. They'd have to disclose that to any buyer. So I'd just be—" "What?" "The woman who comes with the house. Pretty much." I exhaled, sat back. "Is there any way to stop it?" He tapped the documents, then leaned over to reach for his files. "We added something," he said, pulling out a second folder. "A clause your husband insisted on just in case." He opened the deed transfer and pointed to a paragraph in small print. "It states that if Fletcher or Brooke attempt to sell the house without your written consent, you have the right to reclaim full ownership by reimbursing them at the value of the house at the time of the original transfer." I stared at the words, reading them over twice. "You mean I could take the house back? You'd have to pay them what it was worth back then. 5 years ago. But yes, you could trigger the clause. Regain full title, and then do what you want with it." I swallowed. "That's still a lot of money." "It is," he agreed. "But if you can cover it even temporarily, you could turn around and sell the house yourself. At today's value, the difference would be yours." I didn't speak for a few seconds. Then I nodded. "Howard really thought of everything, didn't he? He wanted to protect you, even after he was gone." I told Sheldon I still had Howard's life insurance. Some savings. It would be tight, but possible. He said he'd start preparing the paperwork. All I had to do was keep calm, act normal, and not tip my hand. Let them believe the plan was going smoothly. When I left his office, it was still overcast. I walked slowly back to my car, thinking about everything that had just unfolded. I thought about Howard, how he always liked to plan ahead. I thought about our children and how far they'd drifted from the values we raised them with. But mostly, I thought about what came next. Because this wasn't just about a house. It was about standing up for myself for the first time in a very long time. And the first step was finding a realtor I could trust. Quiet, quick, and completely outside. The next morning, I woke up early and made a list. I still had Sheldon's papers on the table beside me, the clause that gave me the right to reclaim the house and the steps I'd need to take to do it. I called the bank first and made an appointment to discuss pulling from Howard's life insurance and our savings. After that, I opened the laptop, searched quietly for realtors in town, and clicked through listings one by one. I couldn't risk using anyone connected to Fletcher or Brooke. I needed someone discreet, professional, fast. That's how I found Audrey Peak. Her agency specialized in quick private sales. No yard signs, no open houses, just a short list of serious buyers and quiet transactions. She picked up the phone herself when I called, and after a few questions offered to stop by the next morning at 10. I spent the rest of the day walking through the house room by room. The same rooms I'd cleaned and decorated for Christmases and birthdays, the same kitchen where Howard always carved the turkey. Now I was looking at them with fresh eyes, trying to see what a buyer might see. I made notes about what to fix, what to store, what to give away. Audrey arrived right on time. Mid-50s, smart eyes, short gray hair, cut into a neat bob. She shook my hand firmly and stepped into the foyer with a quiet kind of confidence that put me at ease right away. "Mrs. Donovan," she said, "tell me what you're hoping to do and how quickly you want it done." I led her into the living room and explained everything careful with my words. I told her I had the legal right to sell. I showed her Sheldon's documents. I told her I needed it done before the end of the month and that my children couldn't know until the sale was complete. She didn't flinch, didn't ask personal questions, just reviewed the paperwork, asked a few clarifying details, and nodded. "Everything looks in order," she said after a few minutes. "Now let's take a look at the house and set a fair price." We walked through each room and she took notes. She asked about the roof, the plumbing, the furnace. She checked windows, measured closet space, asked about the neighborhood. She opened every door like she'd done it 1,000 times, and I followed behind, watching her pen move briskly across the pages of her notebook. When we got back to the kitchen, she closed her book. "The house is in good condition. Needs some cosmetic work, but the structure's solid. Given the area, the square footage, and the current market, I'd list it at 420. That number was higher than the one Fletcher had on his paperwork. "Do you think it'll sell quickly?" I asked. "With the right buyer?" "Yes," she said. "I'll handpick a few serious clients. No public listings. No showings unless they're pre-screened and ready to act." We shook hands, and Audrey left with a promise to send over the initial forms and schedule the first showing within the week. I didn't waste time. I started in the attic sorting through the old boxes, holiday decorations, baby clothes, Fletcher's old Legos, Brooke's elementary school notebooks. So many drawings with crayon scribbles and crooked hearts signed "Love Brooke." I sat with each box longer than I should have. Some things I kept. Most I didn't. Downstairs, I cleared the kitchen cabinets, wiped down shelves, washed the curtains. I made piles to donate, piles to sell. I had to be quick and quiet just in case either of them dropped by. They didn't. They were still packing for the lake. In one of the boxes from the hall closet, I found a small envelope tied with a faded ribbon. Inside were letters, handwritten, each folded neatly in Howard's careful script. Most were from his business trips during the early years of our marriage. I hadn't read them in decades. One dated September of 1983 said, "When I retire, let's finally take that trip to Italy. You've always wanted to see the coast. We'll find a little cafe and I'll bring a book and you can sketch the hills." I held the letter against my chest for a long time. I had almost forgotten we'd talked about that. We never made it, of course. By the time we had the money, the diagnosis came, and everything changed. I tucked the letter into the side pocket of my suitcase and decided something then and there. After the house sold, after everything was finished, I would go to Italy. For both of us. The next few days passed in a blur of errands and preparation. I hired a gardener to freshen up the front yard, bought fresh towels for the bathrooms, picked up flowers for the dining room table. Audrey brought in a photographer and had the place listed within 48 hours, quietly, no online ads, just direct calls to the right people. The first family that came through was a young couple with a baby. They loved the backyard, but the price was high for them. The second visitor, a bachelor, offered below asking. Audrey suggested I consider it, said the market could shift, but something in me said to wait. 3 days later, a woman named Mrs. Wentworth toured the house. She was in her 50s, recently divorced, and looking to start over. She walked through each room, slowly pausing in the hallway where I'd once marked Fletcher and Brooks Heights with pencil lines on the wall. When she came back into the living room, she looked at me and said, "It feels like a good place. A real place." She offered the full asking price the next morning. The paperwork moved fast after that. Sheldon filed the legal claim to restore my title under the clause, and I wired the payment to the children's accounts, reimbursing them based on the home's value 5 years ago, just as the contract required. Sheldon labeled each transfer repossession compensation. It was all above board. By the time the kids packed up for the lake, the house was mine again. And 2 days before they returned, it was officially sold to someone else. I didn't tell them. Not yet. The check came in on a Friday. Audrey handed it to me with both hands. I signed the final papers that afternoon and walked out of the title office with everything I owned already packed. That evening, I sat on the floor of the living room surrounded by cardboard boxes and fading afternoon light. The house felt hollow without the furniture, quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. I walked through each room one last time. Fletcher's old room with the rocket ship wallpaper. Brooke's pink closet doors, our bedroom, where Howard and I used to whisper after the lights went out. On Saturday morning, a moving van arrived. I had a furnished apartment waiting in town, small with a little balcony, but it was enough. Just temporary. I didn't plan to stay long. Before I locked the front door behind me, I left an envelope on the kitchen table with a letter inside. Nothing emotional, no apology, just the truth and copies of every document. Let them read it when they got back. They got back from the lake on a Sunday afternoon. I knew the time because Brooke texted me that morning, just a quick "we're heading back today. Hope the garden held up in the heat." Nothing else. No mention of the papers. No hint that anything was off. I imagined their faces when they pulled into the driveway and saw the for sale sign gone. The porch swept clean, the key no longer working in the front door. Fletcher would check his phone confused. Brooke would circle around to the back, try the patio door. Maybe they'd even jiggle the garage keypad. But none of it would work. Every code had been reset. Every lock changed. Every item of theirs already boxed and sitting in storage under their names at a unit down on 3rd Street. The letter I left was short. It listed the facts in order, no opinions, no accusations. Just the legal timeline, the clause I had invoked, the proof of reimbursement, and the new sale agreement signed by me and Mrs. Wentworth. I ended it with a note to contact Sheldon Hayes with any questions. I didn't hear anything for hours, not a single word. That evening, I sat by the window in my new apartment, a small 2-bedroom off Elm Avenue. I'd brought only what I needed, some dishes, clothes, Howard's letters, and a few framed photographs. The rest was in storage or donated, a clean start for now. It was almost dark when the call came. Fletcher's name lit up my phone. I let it ring the first time, then again. On the 3rd try, I picked up. His voice was tight, controlled. "Mom, where are you?" "I'm fine," I said. "Is everything all right?" "The locks are changed," he said. "And there's a letter. Did you actually sell the house?" "Yes." There was a long pause. "You sold it without telling us. You tried to sell it without telling me. I exercised my right to stop that from happening." He didn't speak again for several seconds. I could hear Brooke in the background, her voice rising sharp and frantic. "You blindsided us," he finally said. "No," I said calmly. "I followed the agreement. I reimbursed you both, and I let you know everything in writing. But you didn't give us a chance to explain." I paused. "You didn't give me one either." I could tell he wanted to argue. But instead, he hung up. That night, I slept with the window cracked open, the soft sound of crickets outside. I hadn't realized how tense my body had been until I felt it ease my shoulders, sinking into the pillow. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, clear. Over the next few days, I settled in. I found a diner down the block that served decent coffee and a place with a small library cart where I could borrow books. I took walks in the early morning. No one knew me here. I liked that. Brooke came by 3 days later. I heard the knock on the apartment door around 11. When I opened it, she was standing there in a navy dress and sunglasses, her arms crossed. She didn't ask to come in, just stared at me, then handed over a sheet of paper. It was a summary of the financial transfer I'd made, the reimbursement clause, the current market value. Her name highlighted in yellow. "I checked with a lawyer," she said. "You were within your rights, but it was still a betrayal." I looked at her steady. I had to protect what was left of what your father and I built." She didn't respond, just stepped back and said, "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending I hadn't noticed." She turned and left without another word. A week later, Sheldon called to confirm the final legal filings were complete. Everything had been transferred, processed, and closed. I asked him if there was anything else I needed to do. "No," he said. "You've done it." After we hung up, I sat by the window again, a cup of tea in hand. I thought of Howard, how he always believed in finishing what you start. I had done that, quietly, carefully, without turning bitter. The children hadn't called again, and maybe they wouldn't, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. That afternoon, I opened a fresh notepad and made a new list. This one with cities I'd always wanted to visit, museums I'd never seen, trails I'd read about in magazines. I didn't know where I'd go first, or how long I'd stay. But I knew I'd start. And before I could take that first trip, I had one final stop to make. The last place I needed to go was the cemetery. It had been nearly 4 months since I'd visited Howard's grave. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I didn't want to go with the kind of heaviness I'd been carrying. I waited until the house was sold, the accounts settled, the noise quieted down. I brought fresh dahlias, he always liked them. The morning was warm, but not too hot, and the grounds were still damp from a late summer rain the night before. I walked the path slowly past rows of markers and shaded benches until I reached the one with his name etched into the stone. I knelt down and brushed some leaves away from the base. "I handled it," I said quietly, "just like you would have wanted." I stayed there a long time. No speech, no tears, just silence. Then I laid the flowers down and walked back to the car. On the way home, I stopped by the post office. There was a small envelope waiting no return address. Inside was a folded note with Fletcher's handwriting. It said, "I still don't understand, but I hear you." That was all. No apology, no request, just those 6 words. I tucked it in the drawer by the telephone and left it there. That same afternoon, I began packing for my trip. I'd found a small tour group headed to the Amalfi Coast. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet itinerary with plenty of time to walk and think and sit by the water. I booked a room with a balcony and started learning a few Italian phrases off a note card I kept by the kettle. 2 days before the flight, I stopped at the bank to finalize some paperwork. My accounts were all in order. The proceeds from the house were split between my retirement savings and a small travel fund I called later. I had no idea what I'd use it for after Italy, but it felt good just knowing it was there. That evening, while I was finishing my dinner, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brooke standing in the hallway, arms folded across her chest, holding a photo frame. It was the picture of all 4 of us at the cabin, the one from the fall after Howard's diagnosis. We'd gone for a weekend, hoping to clear our heads. Fletcher had built the fire, Brooke had cooked stew, and Howard and I had sat on the porch swing under a blanket. Brooke handed me the photo. "I found this in the storage unit," she said. "Figured it belonged to you." I thanked her and invited her in. She hesitated, then stepped across the threshold. We sat at the small kitchen table, the one I'd picked up from a thrift store down the street. She looked around the apartment, simple walls, soft lighting, a vase of eucalyptus on the counter. "It's different," she said. "It's quiet," I said. "That's what I needed." She looked down at the table and tapped her fingers lightly. "I was angry," she said. "Still am in some ways. You could have told us you were unhappy." "I did," I said, "just not in words." She nodded, eyes still on the table. "Fletcher doesn't know I'm here." I figured. "I'm not here to ask you to undo anything," she added. I just wanted to know why now I thought about that for a moment. Because it was time. Because I was tired of waiting to be considered. She looked at me again, then not with anger, but something softer. Maybe not understanding, but less resistance than before. She stood up after that and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back and said, "Italy sounds nice. You should go." I plan to. When she was gone, I placed the photo on the bookshelf next to Howard's letters. The next morning, I zipped up my suitcase, left a set of house keys with my neighbor for emergencies, and made my way to the airport shuttle. I had 2 books packed a folder with my itinerary and a worn coin purse Howard gave me on our 10th anniversary. The plane lifted off just after noon. I watched the clouds shift and stretch beneath us, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. But that peace didn't last long. When I landed, there was a message from Sheldon waiting just a few words. "Call me as soon as you can. Urgent." I called Sheldon from the hotel lobby, my suitcase still by my feet, passport in hand. The connection crackled a bit, but his voice came through clear enough. "Margaret," he said, "you're going to want to sit down." I found a quiet bench in the corner near the window. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. "There's been an issue with the trust account," he said. Fletcher and Brooke attempted to access a portion of the remaining funds using an old financial power of attorney document 1 that predates Howard's final revisions. I didn't speak at first, just listened. They presented it to the bank as if it were still valid. Fortunately, the officer flagged it and contacted me. "Nothing's been withdrawn, but it's clear they're looking for a way back in." I asked how they got the document. Sheldon paused. "I don't know," he said, "but someone had to go digging for it." The line went quiet again. I could hear the low hum of hotel staff wheeling carts past the clink of cups being cleared from a breakfast table. "I'll take the next flight back," I said. "No need," he said. "I've already filed a formal block and submitted Howard's final directive to override the outdated document. You're protected, but I wanted you to hear it from me." "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat there for a long while. Outside, the narrow street shimmered with heat, tourists drifting in sandals and sunglasses past gelato stands and souvenir shops. I hadn't even checked into my room yet. My reservation stretched 10 days, but suddenly I didn't want the ocean breeze or quiet walks through lemon groves. I just wanted to be home. I rescheduled the flight and caught an overnight back to the States. The flight was uneventful, but I didn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling around what kind of conversation had led Fletcher and Brooke to dig up that old document. How far had they planned to go? By the time I landed, it was mid-morning. I stopped at my apartment just long enough to swap clothes and check the mailbox. Then I went straight to the bank. Sheldon met me in the conference room, a folder already open on the table. "They haven't contacted me again," he said, "but I'd recommend setting up a secondary layer of protection." We spent the next hour updating passwords, security questions, and filing a notice to remove all prior powers of attorney from the file. As we were wrapping up, Sheldon leaned back in his chair. "You're handling this well," he said. "Most people your age would have panicked." I nodded. Most people don't realize what they've lived through until they're standing on the other side of it. He smiled, handed me a fresh copy of the documents, and said, "If anything changes, you'll be the first to know." That night, I didn't unpack. Instead, I took a walk around the neighborhood. It was just past sunset, the sky washed in soft purples and orange. A few porches glowed with string lights. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked rhythmically over a patch of lawn. I passed the small park on 8th and noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. Writer's Workshop, Thursdays at 7. I took one of the tear-off tabs and folded it into my coat pocket. Back home, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. I thought about what Sheldon said about handling things well. I wasn't sure I had, but I'd been steady. And sometimes that was enough. The next morning, I received an email from Fletcher. No greeting, no sign-off, just a single line. We only wanted what was fair. I didn't respond. Instead, I logged into my banking portal, moved the trust balance into a separate protected account, and sent Sheldon confirmation. Then I opened a fresh document on my computer and started writing. Not a letter, not a list, just memory, scene by scene. I didn't know if I'd ever share it, but it felt right to begin. And just when I thought the dust had finally settled, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Brooke, and it wasn't Fletcher. It was Sheldon at the door. He stood there in a windbreaker, holding a thin envelope and a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. The air outside had that late September crispness, just beginning to pull the warmth out of the day. "I know it's unannounced," he said, "but I was nearby for a meeting and thought I'd drop this off in person." I stepped aside and let him in. He handed me the envelope first. It was the final settlement statement, official now. All pending assets closed, every document filed, every protection in place. The trust was intact, and permanently out of Brooke and Fletcher's reach. "There's nothing left they can touch," he said. "It's done." I nodded and set the envelope on the table. He gestured to the tote. "This is something else." I watched him unzip it. Inside were 2 old ledgers, a worn red folder, and a collection of bound notebooks. "I went through the storage archives at your old firm," he said. There were materials tied to Howard's original estate draft. Turns out he kept journals. Lots of them. Financial notes, private reflections. Some entries about you. He handed me the top one. The handwriting was unmistakably Howard's: tight loops, neat columns, occasional underlines. He mentioned wanting to leave you something that couldn't be disputed. A record, in case they ever tried to rewrite the past. I sat down and opened to a random page. It was dated 5 months before his passing. A list of concerns. Notes about trust disbursement. A small paragraph that read, "Margaret has kept this family standing longer than anyone knows. She deserves rest. She deserves freedom." I closed the notebook and sat still for a moment. The room felt very quiet. Sheldon stayed another 10 minutes, long enough for a cup of coffee. Then he left me with the bag and said, "Take your time. Let me know if you want to do anything formal with the writings." After he left, I spent the afternoon reading. "Not all of it, just a little." Howard's voice came through steady and practical, the way he'd always spoken. But there was care beneath the surface, thoughtfulness. I saw the way he documented each withdrawal Fletcher made during college. How he had set aside emergency funds for my health expenses. How he quietly shifted investments after Brooke's 3rd request for bridal help. By sunset, I was halfway through the 3rd notebook. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I stayed up organizing the pages by year. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began listing key points, entries that could show clear intent. Dates that matched major family events. His notes about what I gave up after his diagnosis. The next morning, I called Sheldon and said I wanted to draft a letter. Not a legal one, just something clear, something final. We met the following week and wrote it together. It explained that the trust was settled, the will was honored, and no further discussion would be entertained. We included selected photocopies from Howard's journal sections where he explained his reasoning in plain terms. There was no bitterness in it, just facts. Boundaries drawn neatly in ink. We mailed one copy to Fletcher, another to Brooke. 2 weeks passed. No response from either of them. Not even a text. Then one afternoon, I saw them. It was at the grocery store. I'd gone in to grab a few apples and baking soda. As I turned the corner by the produce, I saw them near the deli counter. Fletcher holding a shopping basket, Brooke thumbing through her phone. We locked eyes for a second. Neither of them said a word. I gave a small nod, nothing more, and walked past. I didn't look back. At home, I put the groceries away, set the apples in a bowl on the counter, and turned on the oven to bake. Something simple. A cinnamon loaf, maybe. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I was just still. The cinnamon loaf cooled on the counter, while sunlight slipped across the kitchen tiles, soft and golden, like the closing pages of a well-worn book. I didn't check my phone. Didn't wonder if Brooke or Fletcher would ever call again. I'd stopped looking for something that was never mine to hold on to in the first place. A few days later, I gathered Howard's journals and placed them in a cedar box lined with velvet. I labeled each spine with the year in small gold lettering. They fit snugly, as if that box had been waiting all along. I set it on the top shelf of the study right beside a photograph of our wedding day and another from the lake house in '82, the year we planted those pear trees. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd said no to 1,000 little cuts to the silence they once used to shape me. And in the end, that no was louder than any speech or confrontation could have been. It was in the papers I signed, the locks I changed, the mailbox that stayed empty from people who used to demand everything but never stayed long enough to ask how I'd been. What surprised me most was how still life became after all the noise stopped. The house didn't feel quiet in a lonely way. It felt whole. I started baking again. Little things, peach scones, zucchini muffins, an old banana bread recipe I hadn't touched in years. I took a pottery class at the senior center just to see what it felt like to make something soft hold its shape. And one afternoon, a young woman from the library called. They were looking to start a memoir writing group for women over 60. Would I be interested in joining, maybe even leading? I said I'd think about it. That evening, I sat with one of Howard's notebooks on my lap. Page 73 dated March 14th. She stayed. When everyone else pulled away, she stayed. I think about that sometimes, not just what I stayed for, but what I stayed with. Kindness, boundaries, a kind of dignity that doesn't always announce itself but never disappears either. I don't know what Brooke and Fletcher tell themselves now. I don't need to. What I know is this: there is power in choosing peace over performance. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or land or things in a box. It's knowing you told the truth even when no one clapped for it. If you've ever had to walk away from people you once called family, if you've ever built your own table because no one left a seat for you, then you already know. We don't always get the apology, but we do get the last word. Thank you for listening to my story. And if any part of it stayed with you, I'd be honored if you left a comment or shared it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll be right here, maybe with a loaf in the oven, hoping your quiet is just as full.